We begin tonight with Trey Gowdy, former House Oversight Committee chairman and now a Fox News contributor. Trey, always good to see you. Thank you for being here tonight. I want to get actually first to the soundbite that we just played. You say that whoever is looking into this, in this case it's Mr. Durham, and I want to get your thoughts on that in a minute, but you say they should definitely look at the Brennan Comey FBI emails in summer of 2016?
December of 2016.
December 2016,
over the weekend, Senator Graham was really exercised over the lack of corroboration of this dossier that was used in court filings. So the question then becomes, was it unverified, uncorroborated when you used it? And then when did you begin to corroborate it? And what I'm telling Mr. Durham or whoever is going to look into this, I think you'll see late in 2016, well after it had been used, it was still unverified, and the people responsible for it were referring to it as unverified, and one or the other demanded that it be included in the intelligence assessment, which then leaked, which then prompted the discussion you and I are having now publicly.
There's a statement that just came out this evening that Catherine Herridge has been reporting, and I think we have that we can put on the screen, but the gist of it is that John Brennan is pushing back on all of this today. So clearly he knows that there's now another investigation into it. He heard, of course, Attorney General Barr say that I'm not just interested in the FBI, I'm also interested in the other agencies, which of course would point ostensibly at John Brennan, who was the head of the CIA at the time. So the statement tonight, or the finding in the reporting of Catherine Herridge tonight, says that John Brennan says that he and James Clapper did not want to include the dossier, that it was James Comey who insisted on including the dossier as they were doing the investigation and also in the intelligence report that was presented to President Trump. What do you think about that, Trey?
I think that it's one more place for Mr. Durham to start. That's a pretty easy thing to sort out. Who insisted that the dossier or the unverified material from Chris Steele be included? But Martha, sometimes when you have two people, I can tell you, having been in a courtroom, sometimes when two people are blaming each other, they're both right. It's both of them. And I think it's interesting. Brennan and Comey right now, the only thing they seem to share is a hatred for Donald Trump. It's going to be interesting if they begin to turn on one another. I've seen the document. I'm not going to describe it any more than that. Comey's got a better argument than Brennan based on what I've seen.
Well, that's interesting. Brennan was talking about this afternoon on another cable channel, and he's very defensive, obviously, about the need for any further investigation here. And here's what he said about what they were doing, what they were looking into.
I think they're just trying to, demonstrate that there was, problems with what the Obama administration did as far as it pursued this investigation. But as you point out, it went through a rigorous due process within the Department of Justice, the FBI. It was approved by the FISA court. It went through all of those steps.
The other thing that they made, that they were emphatic about in that interview was that the FISA court has an extremely high bar. They said there's no way that they would have approved any wiretap, any, surveillance of Carter Page if they didn't have that whole thing down cold. They say they don't just approve these things willy-nilly. We've heard differently, that the bar is actually quite low for approving them. What do you say?
Well, the judges are not investigators. They're only as good as the information presented to them, which is why you make the applicant swear out. You swear out an application. And when the FBI is telling you that this information's been verified, and when they're telling you it's been investigated and it's been corroborated, the judge has to rely on that. They don't get to go conduct their own separate investigations, which is why it's really important to ask the FBI agents and Comey, if you verified this information before its use, which we know you did not, but if your position is you did, tell us how. I've seen the spreadsheet, Martha. I have seen each factual assertion listed in that dossier, and then I've seen the FBI's justification. And when you're citing newspaper articles as corroboration for a factual assertion that you have made, you don't need an FBI agent to go do a Google search. And when the name's Sidney Blumenthal, is included as part of your corroboration, and you're the world's leading law enforcement agency, you have a problem. And you can blame it on the FISA court if you want to, but I hope Brennan is smart enough to know judges don't investigate. They have to rely on the honest word of the people presenting it to them, and if that honest word is missing, then the judge is going to make the wrong decision.
All right. There's another report tonight coming in from the New York Times, which suggests, citing sources that are close to Mr. Durham or the Department of Justice or both, that this is just a review, that he's just going to look over the Mueller report and he's going to figure out whether or not there needs to be an investigation. Now, my understanding, and I want to hear what you think about this, is that the reason that the DOJ wanted to have a U.S. attorney look into this is because they actually have prosecutorial power. They might be able to actually get to the bottom of this if there is indeed some sort of criminal behavior, and that's way off at this point. The other difference is that unlike an inspector general at an agency, they can look at people who used to work there, not just people who work there. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am. You put your finger, I'm a big Michael Horowitz fan, but you put your finger on the reason that many of us called for a second special counsel a year ago. Horowitz doesn't have access to the grand jury. He doesn't have access to former employees. He's a wonderful investigator, but he's only as good as the tools he's given. Durham has access to a grand jury, and he has access to search warrants, and he has access to subpoenas, and he's got access to any witness he wants to talk to. So that's your number one investigation. But, Horowitz is the one who found the struck page text, and Horowitz is the one who dinged Jim Comey for that press conference. So the more the merrier. It's been 2 years now, and I think the country would like to know from someone they can trust what was the factual predicate, not for the Russia investigation, but for the intermelding of the Russia investigation with the Trump campaign. Give us the factual predicate, and we'll decide whether or not it was sufficient or not.
Trey, thank you very much. Trey Gowdy, good to see you tonight,
Yes,
sir.
All right, joining me now with reaction, former U.S. Attorney Joe DeGeneva, House Oversight Committee ranking member Jim Jordan, and former Deputy Independent Counsel Robert Ray. Doesn't get better than this tonight. Joe, what does the impressive scope of this new probe initiated by Barr tell us tonight?
James Comey, Brennan, and Clapper have said to themselves, which one of us is going to pay the Barr bill? The Barr bill is coming due. And Durham's appointment means that the already occurred meetings between the Attorney General, the CIA Director, and the Director of National Intelligence have now focused on a laser that the core of this conspiracy began with John Brennan and ends with John Brennan in London and D.C. and the Democratic National Committee. This is very serious business, and for the first time, I now believe that some of these guys are going to go to prison.
Wow. You mentioned Brennan tonight, and
Oh, yeah.
Congressman Jordan, we got some profound sound from both Brennan and Clapper. This was Brennan today explaining what's going on with this new probe. Let's watch.
It went through a rigorous due process within the Department of Justice, the FBI. It was approved by the FISA court. It went through all of those steps. What they're trying to do is to uncover something that they will misrepresent as being part of this deep state effort to try to undermine Donald Trump's election.
It was all copacetic, Congressman. It was
That's what he wants you to
approved,
believe.
went through the FISA court. You're investigating the investigators. It's an embarrassment. You heard it.
No, he used the term misrepresent. The only misrepresentation is what they did with the dossier in front of the FISA court, where they didn't tell the court who paid for the document. They didn't tell the court that the guy who wrote it, Christopher Steele, was desperate
How
to
serious
stop
is
Trump.
this tonight? I mean, the other networks are poo-pooing this, saying
this
is fantasy land for
I
conservatives.
think this is very serious. I think it's Bill Barr doing what he said. Remember, when he was in front of the Senate Finance Committee 4 weeks ago, he said he was serious about putting together a team to get to the bottom of this. He said there was four key things. There was a failure of leadership at the upper echelon of the FBI. We know that's true. He said spying took place. He said it twice. He said there's a basis for his concern about the spying that occurred.
Right.
And finally, the two terms he used, I said this last week in the committee hearing, he used two terms that should scare every single American. He said unauthorized surveillance and political surveillance. Those things are not supposed to happen.
That's what China does.
Exactly.
Joe,
They're
you
not
and I
supposed to
talk.
happen in
This
this
is
country.
what China does.
And he
This
wants to
is
get to
what
the bottom
Russia
of it.
does. And Robert Ray, I got to get you in on this because they accuse Trump of basically spooning with Vladimir Putin to get elected. Okay, and yet they use autocratic, dictatorial means to surveil the Trump campaign, to get the information that they claimed was going to be there. Of course, it never was there. And now we have the DNI involved, and we have the CIA involved with a man as serious as Bill Barr. He was not cowed one bit by what they tried to do to him last week, was he, Robert?
Well, Congressman Jordan is right. I mean, this isn't a question about whether the procedural steps were followed. This is a question that first is exploring bias and whether that had an impact on what was or wasn't disclosed to the FISA court, which, to answer your question, Laura, is a serious issue. There's a case in the Supreme Court about this, Franks versus Delaware, which all prosecutors and agents are familiar with. And it's a serious question now that's going to be explored by a prosecutor, after all. This is not duplicative of Michael Horowitz's investigation because the IG doesn't have prosecutorial authority to actually bring charges. But in this instance now, as the result of Bill Barr's appointment, there is going to be an investigation, the purpose of which is to determine whether or not any crimes were committed, which is Joe DeGeneva's point.
Crimes committed.
Yeah.
This is now explaining why they threw so much mud at a man like Bill Barr. With the history and the reputation he has, what's the most dangerous thing out there? Someone who has nothing to lose? Bill Barr made a lot of money.
He
didn't need this job, right?
You never kicked the bear.
Oh, no.
And let me tell you something. Horowitz has already concluded that the final 3 FISAs were completely illegal. He's now on the brink of finding that the first FISA was completely illegal. Durham has already used a grand jury in Connecticut. They've already gotten documents. He's already talked to the intel people.
How long has this been going on? Do we really know how long this?
Durham's been working for a couple of months. So the bottom line is this. This is now big time. This is where Brennan needs 5 lawyers. Comey needs 5 lawyers.
Are they lawyered up sufficiently?
Well, I hope Comey has someone other than Mr. Richmond to whom he leaked his memos, his little special employee.
Isn't Patrick Fitzgerald the old, another prosecutor I don't like?
Nothing like a sleazy prosecutor to represent him at this point.
Another horrible. He did the Conrad Black. He's an outrage.
Patrick Fitzgerald's disgusting.
Horrible prosecutor.
That's the U.S. attorney who was also looking into Jim Baker, the former chief counsel of the FBI. So that's where that investigation was also taking place. So I think that's interesting. That's who Bill Barr selected, and it's not just the dossier. Remember what we learned 2 weeks ago? The New York Times reported that the FBI put someone posing as someone else, and by George Papadopoulos,
he talked about.
So those are 2 cases where spying took place.
I want to play Papadopoulos. We also have to play Bernie Sanders, who is out there tonight talking about this. But I want to play Papadopoulos first, since you raised it, Congressman. I want to get you and Ray and Joe to talk about it. Let's watch.
I fly to Greece, I have dogs sniffing for money, I leave the money in Greece, I'm then arrested in a savage-like manner at Dulles with agents rummaging through my bags looking for money. So clearly this was some sort of sting operation, and by the time it happened, the special counsel was appointed.
Now, he was caught up in this. They were dangling money at him, at least. I mean, and this was, they all knew how this was all going to go. This was all rolled out according to plan until it wasn't.
They put somebody posing as somebody else with George Papadopoulos and start asking all these questions early on in this entire investigation.
And that was what kicked it all off, supposedly, correct?
Back in July of 2016.
Right.
So Bill Barr has said he's going to get to the bottom of it. He's now appointed someone to head that team up that he said he was going to point together. That is a good thing. Let's get to the bottom of this so that nothing like this, if everything that we think happened did, this should not happen in the United States of America, and that's what we got to prevent.
And we still haven't gotten to the bottom of the Hillary Clinton email scandal, which is the other thing they have to touch. But I've got to play this Bernie Sanders. Of course, one of the Democratic frontrunners had this to say today about the launch of this new investigation.
Trump does all of the time. He tries to divert attention from the realities and the problems that are associated with the White House or, in fact, his campaign. As I understand it, what the FBI did is they had reason to believe that there was collusion, and they investigated that collusion. So no, I don't think we should be investigating the investigators.
Of course not. But it's true on the other foot. He'd be doing a candlelight vigil right now, Robert. As a former independent counsel, do you agree with Bernie here?
No, I mean, the president is right at the conclusion of the investigation. The Mueller investigation is over, to wonder how we got on this path to start with. I mean, isn't that an appropriate question to ask? I mean, I'm not going to prejudge the outcome. I think, unlike Democrats, there's no point in singing about what may come or what prosecutions may unfold, but clearly it warranted a second look. That was why there was an IG investigation, and now the handoff is complete. It's now in the hands of a prosecutor with prosecutorial authority who will make a decision about whether or not any crimes were committed and whether or not it's appropriate to bring charges against those who were responsible. I mean, that's what you expect the Department of Justice to do, don't you? I mean, that's what I expect the Department of Justice to do.
Not sign off on phony dossiers.
I mean,
Joe,
Bill Barr said it was a big deal. It is a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal.
Liberals used to care about civil liberties, no matter whose civil liberties were being tread upon. Trod upon? Tread upon? Trod upon. Thank you, Joe. But they used to care about this, right? Yeah, okay, anything. I'm doing that with my kids' essays every night, checking their grammar. I got to check my own. But I got to ask about something. This Don Jr. deal. They cut some deal for him to testify for the Senate Intel Committee with Richard Burr in his saddle. What is going on with that?
I would have told him to stick it.
Me too.
And I would have taken the fifth.
Why is Don Jr. doing that?
Prophylactic use of the fifth. Look. What's going on now in the House and the Senate with Richard Burr, who is a disgusting Republican chairman? I'm so sick of Richard Burr, this phony Republican from North Carolina. Listen, Don Jr. has every right to believe that what's happening is abusive and vindictive, just like everything that's going on in the House. No citizen has to take that. They can invoke the Fifth Amendment because they're innocent and don't want to be put through a perjury.
They didn't have any problem with Lois Lerner invoking the Fifth.
Mark Warner's running that committee, a Democrat.
That's embarrassing.
They're calling him back based on the testimony of a guy who went to prison last Monday for lying to Congress. And when he came in front of our committee, he lied 7 times. That's why they're calling him back. That makes no sense.
Guys, I could do a whole hour with this panel. Love this panel. Thank you so much, all 3 of you.